Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Leon and Josephine Winkelman Memorial Lecture. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. For those joining us in person today, and if you wish to receive CEs, please make sure you sign in at the back table and sign out on your way out. And you will not be able to receive CE unless you sign out today. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the event. If you are joining us in person, please raise your hand and we will bring a microphone over to you. If you are joining us online and have a question, please put it in the Q&A box on Zoom. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. With that, I would like to invite Dean Beth Angel to the podium to welcome you to today's presentation.
Thank you, Madison. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beth Angel. I'm the Dean of this amazing School of Social Work, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to the 2025 Leon and Josephine Winkelman Memorial Lecture. Now, I'm especially delighted this year to welcome you all for two reasons. One is that this is the first time that the Winkelman Lecture has been held with an in-person component, with the speaker here in person with us, since before the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's really wonderful to see all of you here who are in the room and to be together in person. And then the second reason is, I don't know about you, but I'm finding myself really in need of intellectual nourishment right now. I'm reading a lot of news. I'm reading news all the time, all day long, Friday nights, Saturday nights. And it's you find yourself reacting to it in the moment. And what I think would feel really grounding to me right now, and I hope you'll feel the same way, is to really just immerse ourselves in why we do what we do and in the knowledge that we produce, which is way more durable and powerful than anything that happens on any given day in the news cycle. So I'm hoping that we're all going to fill our cups in this way. Now, before we begin today, I want to share with you some information about this lecture series history, and especially about our benefactors who are responsible for bringing us together. Josephine Winkelman was a 1919 graduate of the University of Michigan's social work program, and she worked at Hull House, the renowned settlement house in Chicago. Her husband, Leon Winkelman, co-founded Winkelman's Stores in Detroit with his brother Isidore in 1928. Their son, Stanley, was a leader in civic affairs in Detroit and deeply involved in social justice issues in the city. In 1978, the Leon and Josephine Memorial Lecture was created here at the school through an endowed gift from Stanley and his brothers as a tribute to their parents, which is really wonderful. This lecture provides a forum for presenting new and emerging knowledge from the social sciences and the helping professions in the field of gerontology. Their lecture also provides an opportunity for us to discuss the application of knowledge to developing social policy, the organization and management of social welfare services, and the delivery of social work services. We're really grateful to the Winkelman family for their support of this important annual event that informs our profession and provides an opportunity to honor our alumna, Josephine Winkelman and her husband, Leon. And now I'm going to be handing things to the very capable hands of Professor Robert Joseph Taylor, who will serve as our moderator today. And I will first want to tell you a little bit about him, though he needs no introduction. Robert is the Harold R. Johnson Endowed Professor of Social Work and the Sheila Feld Collegiate Professor of Social Work here at the school. Robert is an esteemed and influential researcher who has published extensively on the informal social support networks, family, friends, and church members of adult and elderly Black Americans. He has been a co-principal investigator on several National Institute of Mental Health grants on the correlation of mental health and mental illness among Black Americans. Robert's influence, of course, as we all well know, goes beyond research, and his leadership has directly impacted and encouraged more than a generation of social work scholars. He is the principal investigator of the Michigan Center for Urban African American Aging Research, or MUCWAR, as we call it, and the director of the Program for Research on Black Americans, PRBA. These two programs host a summer mentoring workshop, which Robert has directed since its inception in 1998. In 2021, Robert received the inaugural James Jackson Outstanding Mentorship Award from the Gerontological Society of America, which again is another testament to his powerful influence on future generation of gerontologists nationally. So Robert, with that introduction, I will hand things to you to lead off with introducing our speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, our speaker today is Ernest Gonzales. Ernest is the James Weldon Johnson Professor at NYU. And first, before we start, how many people have ever heard of James Weldon Johnson? Can you raise your hands if you've heard of him? So let me tell you a little bit about James Weldon Johnson. So first, here's a picture of him and W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois is considered the father of American sociology. Durkheim's considered the father of all sociology, but Du Bois, American sociology. James Weldon Johnson helped organize the NAACP's Silent Protest March of 1917. There's both a men's march and a women's march. This is the women's march where everybody's in white. This is the protest lynching. This is in New York City, down Fifth Avenue. The first, the men's march, everybody was, all the men were wearing black suits. He coined the term Red Summer to talk about the massacres of riots between blacks and whites. He coined that term for 1919. However, this really continued at least until 1921, began always in the hot summer months. And he is the author of what people now call the Black National Anthem, which is Lift Every Voice and Sing. You may have heard this before. And these are some of the lyrics to that song. And this is him teaching creative writing at Fisk University in 1932. And I have a semi-connection with Fisk in that I was born right next door to Fisk at Meharry Medical Hospital. So getting back to Dr. Gonzales, this is a picture of me, my wife, a colleague of ours, and Ernest. It just so happens we were walking down the street in Montreal in August, and walking towards us was Ernest. And here he is with his dog. We were there for a conference. He was there just to be there to have fun. So I thought it was important to share this. And the name of his dog is Dunkel. And there is a Dr. Ruth Dunkel, who's a professor here. I'm assuming there's a coincidence there. So again, to get back to Ernest, this is a brief biography, and I'll let you read that, but I just want to add a few more things to it. So again, he's an associate professor at NYU and the James Weldon Johnson Professor there. His research investigates risk and protective factors affecting health throughout the lifespan, with an emphasis on productive aging. His research is supported by numerous institutions, including National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, National Institute on Aging, Social Security Administration, AARP Foundation, and several other foundations. He's been a content expert for the National Academies and the National Science Foundation. He's testified to the U.S. Senate Committee on Aging. He's given talks at the United Nations, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, And now we can add the esteemed University of Michigan. He earned his PhD from the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis. And I've heard from numerous sources that both as a student and as a professor, that he is an absolutely great mentor, both in terms of a peer mentor and in terms of being a mentor to students and junior professors. So please welcome Dr. Ernest Gonzales.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for that wonderful introduction, and to the Dean as well. It is such an honor to be with you this afternoon. And my relationship to Michigan is now going on 20 years. And I have received such incredible training here at ISR, at MCWAR, at McFAD, and not just training, but also mentorship. And this mentorship has translated into lifelong friendships. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for the opportunity for the Winkelman Lecture, but more importantly, to all of the training that I've received here at Michigan. And I'm paying it forward. It's an obligation that all of us have. And this is just a quick list of a few doctoral students and bachelor's and master's students that, if you've cared so much to train me, well, I certainly have to pay it forward. So thank you. To get started, there are a couple of different theoretical frameworks on how to advance long, productive, healthy lives. And so we'll spend just a few moments on my theoretical approach to this perspective. Something's going on here. Okay. And with a handful of studies, there are really three messages that I want you to take home. The first is that age discrimination is alive and well. It's subtle. It sometimes can be explicit. It's harmful, and it's expensive. And you'll see pretty soon how much older adults have in common with emerging professionals in their late teens and 20s when we think about ageism across the entire lifespan. The second set of studies is really looking at how can we promote working longer as a choice in the context of cumulative disadvantage and advantages, with an emphasis on race and ethnicity. And again, you'll see that there's some common ground that Republicans, independents, and Democrats have when it comes to this area of work and retirement. The last set of studies is really what we've been focused on at the center, focused on cognitive health and how we could actually bolster cognitive health across the entire lifespan. I'm going to advocate that we need to flatten the curve, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a few minutes. But it's really just a rebuke on the old adage, no data, no problem. That is a serious problem. We're missing opportunities to build cognition there. And then conclude with policies, practices, and research for the future, and open it up to Q&A. As many of you know, there's currently great debate as to whether we're living longer than we have ever in humankind as we're emerging from COVID. Really hot debate, not going to touch that this afternoon, but there's general consensus that the sheer number of older adults will continue to increase substantially in the next few decades to come, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Often when we think about aging and older adults, a number of words that start with the letter D come to mind. Most recently at the World Bank, we engaged in a debate about aging, and there were some bankers who had MDs and they were economists, and they characterized older adults with words that start with the letter I. And I think we could agree that the World Bank is riddled with ageism as well. If that's in their mindset, imagine what kind of policies worldwide their passing. Productive aging with an equity perspective views older adults as assets to society, longevity as a blessing, and aging as an opportunity. When we think about aging in a deficits perspective, a number of questions start to emerge for science. But when we flip that paradigm, different questions emerge. This is one, for example, that actually gets me out of bed every day. And it's not just how can we live a long life, but rather how can we all live a healthy, long life with strong economic foundation, strong social bonds with family, friends, and community. And I debated myself whether I should include this or not in a diverse, loving, and peaceful society. Let's achieve that goal. And that will require us thinking about productive aging and equity together. We define productive aging as any activity that produces a good or service by an older adult, whether paid for or not. And I get into a lot of debates on, I take Shakespeare classes. Is that productive aging? We could have that conversation, but typically we focus on activities that have social policies, social institutions behind them. And here there are four: education, employment, civic engagement, and caregiving. Dr. Taylor had mentioned, my activities with the national academies and some consensus reports. These are transdisciplinary panels, and more often than not, it's so clear that there is an economic perspective on this, and I would argue it's a carrots and stick approach. An example is Social Security. For every year that we delay claiming Social Security after our full retirement age, we could get an 8% increase per year, a carrot. If you retire on time, no carrot and no stick. But if you happen to need to retire earlier, you will feel the whip of the stick. And my argument here is that individuals who feel that sting of the stick more often felt it earlier in their lifetimes. And those that will get another carrot likely already have a garden of carrots. So I don't think a carrot and stick approach is really humane in advancing long, productive lives. Rather, I take a person and environment perspective, a life course perspective, and an equity infused in it to really help unpack those inequitable experiences across our lifetime that pile up and would lead an individual to retire earlier or later. And you'll see in just a few studies. This area of research is also fraught with a tension of principles. If we're not careful about the research questions we ask, it's very easy to send a cultural message that productive aging is elitist. It's an obligation. We could really flare up intergenerational conflict. And so we lean into all those principles on the right of inclusion, of opportunity, anti-oppressive practices, intergenerational harmony, building win-win-win solutions, not just for older adults, but for every generation. And hopefully ensuring that productive aging in later life is a choice rather than an obligation. Under some optimal conditions, there are a wide range of really wonderful outcomes at the individual level, for which we'll review shortly, but also within families, organizations, and society. Volunteering by older adults, for example, saves our nation $77 billion a year. I said billion with a B. That's the advantage of productive aging in later life when it's a choice. Okay, so that's the kind of theoretical approach. Let's dive into a couple of empirical studies. Here, the message is that ageism is inclusive, not just of older workers, but younger ones as well. And it's harmful. AARP in 2020 revealed that because of age discrimination, it cost our nation $850 billion lost because goods and services were not being produced. And on the flip side, older adults contributed to nearly $5.7 trillion in jobs that they were engaged in a single year. This is a study that I had done with Lisa Marchiondo, who received her training here at Michigan. But coincidentally, we took 2 weeks of ISR workshops on the HRS and a longitudinal analysis. Totally random. So I met Lisa here. And it quickly occurred to us that we were so passionate about ending ageism. And so we shared dinners and wine, and we talked about gaps in the literature and what could potentially be our contribution. And we realized then that what was missing was a measure that really captured the subtle modern forms of ageism. And how does that vary across the entire working lifespan? And how does it vary by social position? So we set out and we did a mixed method study, qualitatively interviewed about 200 individuals, and then quantitatively surveyed about 1,200 who were working about 20 hours per week, who were 18 years and older. And we came up with WADS, the Workplace Age Discrimination Scale. And items are, please indicate how often you've experienced the following at work. I've been treated as though I'm less capable, been given fewer opportunities, received less social support. My requests have been delayed or ignored. Someone has actually blamed me for failures or problems, all tied to my age. As you can see, when we take a working lifespan perspective, emerging professionals feel as though they're targets of subtle ageism, almost on par with that of older adults. This is really important because Age Discrimination and Employment Act only covers blatant forms of discrimination first, and then secondly, individuals who are 40 years and older. Anyone younger is not protected by ADEA. We also looked to see if it affected health and occupational well-being, and it did in the expected directions while controlling for negative affect. So being a target of ageism resulted in reduced job satisfaction, reduced organizational commitment, increase in turnover, and worse mental health. To unpack heterogeneity, we looked at young, middle, and older adults. Being a target of ageism resulted in decreased organizational commitment, but it was impactful more so for older adults than younger and middle-aged individuals. We saw a subtle interaction with being a target of ageism and poor mental health, again, more impactful for older adults relative to younger and average age. Again, being a target of ageism resulted in reduced job satisfaction. This was true for whites, Blacks, and Hispanics, but we noticed that among Asians, they were less affected. This was before Trump 1.0, 2.0. It was before COVID. I suspect if we reran the data, there would be no interaction at all. They would all decrease. That study clearly had some limitations in that it was cross-sectional. So we replicated it with the 3 waves of the health and retirement study, and many of the same findings were confirmed. While ageism takes place within work settings, clearly it's not the only sociological context. And so applying a cumulative advantage, disadvantage perspective, I had asked, how does major lifetime discrimination, neighborhood characteristics, work discrimination, and everyday discrimination, how does that pile up and impact mental health and retirement age? This was funded by Social Security Administration. Oddly enough, it was funded by them. And I had hypothesized that it was racial ethnic minorities that would retire earlier relative to whites. And you'll see that that hypothesis was not supported with the results. Dived into the HRS again from 2008 to 2014, pre-retirees here. I controlled for a number of important predictors of retirement, such as income, assets, spousal, whether they're married and partnered or not, health insurance, as well as the labor force of their spouses and partners. Many of you are familiar with these measures, but some may not be, especially online. So let's just share a flavor of some of the independent variables here. Major lifetime discrimination asks, at any time in your life, have you been unfairly dismissed from a job, not been hired, unfairly denied promotion, prevented from moving into a neighborhood? You could think redlining, denied a bank loan unfairly, redlining. And how about this one? Unfairly stopped, searched, questioned, physically threatened or abused by the police. Unfairly denied healthcare treatment. So rather episodic but significant moments in one's life. Neighborhood context fell into two latent buckets: physical characteristics and social cohesion. Chronic work discrimination was very similar to WADS. Within the past year, how often are you unfairly given tasks at work that nobody else wants to do, watched more closely, bothered by jokes about women, racial, ethnic minorities, unfairly humiliated at work? And then everyday discrimination, such as treated with less courtesy or respect, poor service at restaurants, stores, people are afraid of you, poorer service from doctors and hospitals. This is disturbing on a number of levels, but it really is about total household income and assets stratified by race, where whites have nearly twice as much relative to Blacks and whites in both categories. This is very hairy, so I will walk you through it, but it's results of cumulative disadvantage stratified by race and ethnicity. Hispanics reported the highest levels of living in physically disordered neighborhoods, followed by Blacks and whites. Blacks reported the highest level of social incohesion within the neighborhood, followed by Hispanics and whites. Blacks reporting the highest level of major lifetime discrimination, with similar rates between Hispanics and whites. We double, triple checked these next results. Whites reported the highest level of work discrimination, then followed by Blacks and whites. Whites reported the highest level of everyday discrimination, followed by Blacks and Hispanics. If we piled that up and created a cumulative disadvantage scale, you can see that Blacks overwhelmingly had higher levels of disadvantage relative to whites and Hispanics. Out of all those measures, only one had asked, why do you think you experienced that bias? And among the entire sample, age was the number one reason. But you can see there's some other intersecting identities here. When stratified by race and ethnicity, age becomes the number one reason for Hispanics and whites, but the second reason among Blacks, and by far the second reason. Blacks overwhelmingly reported race was the reason. And if you look at the white column, race is the very last reason. So thinking about DEI policies, for which I know are now on the chopping block, we could call it anything else, but clearly having a cohesive workplace is important. There are some short bridges and long bridges to cross when thinking about bias. Ageism might be a short bridge. We see that there's common ground across race and ethnicity, as well as with younger workers. Racism is by far that longer bridge, would require a lot of trust to build. And so something to consider. I do remember being in a MICWAR workshop and Dr. Taylor saying to everyone, we need more research on mediation moderation. And when we were doing the study, and there was no statistically significant finding between everyday discrimination and retirement, it occurred to me, there's a mediation model here. And sure enough, there is. Mental health fully mediated the relationship between everyday discrimination and retirement age, whereas the others had a direct effect on retirement as well as operated through mental health. To get back to the original hypothesis, it was rejected. Whites, Blacks, and Hispanics that experienced discrimination, yes. Oh, there you go. Whites, Blacks, and Hispanics that experienced cumulative disadvantage retired at similar ages, 62 and a half, as early as they could. Whites, Blacks, and Hispanics that were advantaged retired at their normal retirement age. And for this cohort, it was 65. This is an area for bipartisan support. Republicans, Democrats, and independents all agree that because of the way that we fund social insurance programs, we need individuals to work longer. And so this is an area of collaboration, but not to approach it with the carrots and sticks, but rather really address cumulative advantage, disadvantage, looking at neighborhoods, interpersonal dynamics. Social workers and others have a very clear role here in bolstering mental health within the workplace that would advance longer working lives and give individuals the choice to work longer rather than a stick. So the last set of studies really addressing no data, no problem, and missed opportunities for building cognitive health. We know relative to whites that BIPOC individuals have higher rates of onset of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. These are cognitive health trajectories by Indigenous, Blacks, Whites, and Hispanics in the Health and Retirement Study, looking at individuals from 2006 to 2020. It's also my PhD student who's now Dr. Whittung at Memory Keepers at the University of Minnesota. His dissertation was supported by the R36 mechanism, which is on the chopping block. But my point here is that nobody wants this cascade ever. We need to flatten the curve. I've experienced Alzheimer's in the family and friends, and I'm confident nearly all of you have. Nobody wants this as a reality. And the good news is that this is another area for bipartisan support. In 2011 and 14, Congress agreed to pass the National Alzheimer's Project Act. And this is an opportunity for finding common ground in an era in which, there's so many divisiveness going on. And thank goodness to Jill Livingston and her team in London, publishing the Lancet report in 2017, 2020, and 24, really underscoring that cognitive health and dementia, we could prevent 45% of dementia cases because of modifiable environmental factors. Yes, genetic plays a role here, and I'll share with you some results, but more often than not, it's the environmental factors that are really compromising cognitive health. Lots of literature demonstrating the robustness of formal education on cognition in later life. But from a productive aging perspective, very little has actually occurred within workplace settings, civic engagement, and caregiving. We're lacking tools to assess the complexity of these roles. And I'll give you an example in just a minute. Let's first take a look at workplace. Large literature here, growing literature. I was really quite struck that so few papers that are being published even included race and ethnicity. And so we performed a scoping review to see how many of what we collected, 5,000 papers nearly, actually explored carefully race and ethnicity as, work could be a social determinant of health. The bottom line was that there's only 7 articles that carefully looked at race and ethnicity. And not to blame the researchers themselves, but the theoretical frameworks that were being used by Cohn and Schiller, for example, environmental and occupational complexity and cognitive reserve by Stern, didn't acknowledge social stratification. And much of the literature reflects that. It wasn't until most recently that some BIPOC scholars started to infuse a critical perspective. Fujishiro in 2017, Jane Lee in 2021, and Hayun in 2020. And even though it's a very small literature, it appears that our work is associated with cognitive health in later life, but the relationship is nonlinear when race, ethnicity, and gender are considered. Here's a couple of studies. So mental and social demands of work yielded positive cognitive functioning across a number of sociodemographics, but physically demanding work really compromised individuals' health. And here, for Hispanics more specifically, Hayun in 2021 revealed that African Americans who have the lowest occupational complexity score had the highest risk of developing Alzheimer's disease relative to whites. Fujishiro tested the hypothesis that complex jobs can build cognitive health. Well, that turned out to be true for white men, not true for white women, and not true for Black men or women. So some inconsistencies here. This is an article that is about to be released. It's really arguing that we need a lifespan perspective to see how many different productive roles we engage in that could build cognitive health with education, employment, caregiving, civic engagement, and leisure, and have an overall arching cognitive health measure on productive activities. These are some analyses under review. APOE, especially the LEs4, had a negative effect on cognitive functioning among older Hispanics in the health and retirement study, but so did other productive activities. You can see that higher levels of education yielded greater health performances among older Hispanics. Employment, oddly enough, folks that were working started out with lower cognitive performance, but over time, that increased, while folks who were not working initially had higher levels, but that gradually declined over time. And volunteering at any hours, whether 100 hours or 200 hours, clearly protected cognitive functioning. Among older Hispanics, about half had less than a high school education. 1 in 4 actually volunteered. There is a high risk profile among Hispanics and cognitive impairment, and these are missed opportunities that we could do something about. Civic engagement, again, has bipartisan support traditionally. We know that older adults, however, don't engage as much in volunteering relative to younger folks, and especially low educated and low income. From a rational choice perspective, older managers just don't recruit them. They don't know how to recruit and retain them. And so large segments of older volunteers are just being left behind, even though there's a huge literature showing how beneficial volunteering in later life is. Decreased social isolation and depression, a reduction in falls, which are not only life-threatening, but also really expensive. Falls among older adults cost society $30 billion a year. Cognitive improvement, work with Tam Perry, who's in the room, clearly demonstrates that older adults volunteering strengthen social ties within neighborhoods. These are all very good. And we have evidence-based programs that demonstrate not just the health outcomes for older adults, but reading and math outcomes for at-risk children in 2nd grade. So these types of programs need to be expanded. I am happy to have learned most recently that Michigan Health Endowment Fund partnered with Generations United to really leverage older adults into volunteer roles, but for children, younger generations in a wide range of areas. So just drawing back and coming to a conclusion, this has clearly captured the attention of the national academies, the World Bank. The United Nations is gaining more traction of older adult rights worldwide. And this is our Senate committee prior to this administration, but they were asking all sorts of questions about work, retirement, caregiving. And it's now Senator Rick Scott that's the chair of the Senate Committee on Aging. Many of these issues are still up for conversation. And as I pointed out, there's a lot of bipartisan support here. In Trump 1.0, we learned that he was cutting Meals on Wheels, an incredible program for nutrition. He was going to cut a federally funded program that helps low-income older adults gain jobs. All of us presented evidence on those programs, and because of the randomized control trials, because of the qualitative interviews, those programs were saved. In Trump 2.0, he's taking action on day one. And so my call to all of you who are researchers is we need to get out the evidence. It's not just stand the line, it's demonstrate all these programs that we're so passionate about that we know make an impact. This is the time to elevate your research and protect those programs. So this journal, and specifically for the brief report, is open to receiving your research and helping to advocate for some of these programs. The implications for research, policy, and practice, I think, are really quite evident. Clearly, more research that's inclusive is necessary. We have the workplace construct on how to really see how complex jobs can be. We need that for other roles, caregiving roles, volunteer roles. Right now, volunteer managers recruit and they assign, but it's really shooting from the hip. If we want to maximize that population health, we need better tools to measure its impact. I also think intersectional interventions are necessary. The contact hypothesis, there's about 18 randomized controlled trials. Very compelling that it helps move the needle around internalized racism, ageism, sexism, ableism. Not one study has actually taken an intersectional approach to that quite yet. And it's so evident from the research presented that we need that. At the macro level, protecting older workers against age discrimination is needed. It has bipartisan support. Please reach out to your representatives to pass that. I would even argue that Age Discrimination and Employment Act needs to be expanded, not just for 40 years and older, but everyone. Many countries in Europe have that type of coverage. Expand the volunteer opportunities, especially for low-educated individuals. We learned that from the Hispanics analysis just there. So with that, I will open it up for questions and comments. I do want to acknowledge the funders and to really my social convoy as I move forward. And thank you for your time. So Madison is going to be walking around with the microphone for comments, questions, critique. Yes. Oh, I could take it. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that presentation. My name is Michael Mosley, everybody. And I had one of our student government meetings. I'm the student government president. Her name is Daniela. She said you're one of her professors at NYU.
Oh, great.
And she spoke very highly of you. So I wanted to give you that. One thing I love that you said was productive aging, viewing older people as an asset. And I learned that as a young child when I lost my grandfather at 4. I still remember full conversations we had. and he helped out tremendously, which of course, it took away from our ecosystem. And I used to be a high school science teacher before I came here. And because of that, I apologize to my mom a lot because kids will not listen to older adults. And I still apologize to her for not listening as a kid. And now I just love her wisdom. I call her up, probably I irritate her because I love learning from her mistakes. And there's so much wisdom to be shared. And I say that to say, what do you think, and I'm also part of the Asian adults group here. What do you think that we can do to get younger people and just to bridge the gap? Because we're all gonna reach that age one day. How can I help get them more involved?
Yeah. Love the question. And, it's so interesting being at NYU, I'm blown away at how many undergrads see the benefits of just being mentored by older adults. I was approached by one most recently that created a program called Bedside DJ. And it was him and his friends as freshmen that would go into nursing homes and just play music and get to know each other. So it could be brief and brilliant as that. We also have at NYU an intergenerational home sharing program. Housing insecurity is alive and well for all generations, but even more so for older adults and for graduate students. Graduate students, as you know, don't really have access to campus housing. So we've been building out that model at NYU. It's a hard nut to crack, but it really yields all of the outcomes that we expected. Financial security, food security. There's someone taking care of mom. You have another eyes there. There's someone taking care of my child there. Really great thinking about that. AARP's Experience Corps it's a tutoring program. And the idea here was that there were so many older adults that have time, talent, and skills, and yet no opportunity to give back. And so they partnered with local elementary schools and trained the older adults around reading and math. And this is taking place across 22 different cities. Incredible outcomes on older adults. For children, they chose second graders to get the tutor. Significant improvements. There was an RCT that demonstrated that, but they chose the second grade because it's been demonstrated that should they gain the reading skills then, high levels of probability of graduating from high school and going into college. So, there are folks in the room that are psychologists, developmental psychologists. There's opportunities for thinking about how can we tie up some loose ends from a developmental perspective, not just for older adults, but younger generations. And I think it's a win-win type of situation, time and time again. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. This was really engaging and interesting. So I really appreciate all of your work. I'm an alumni and working at a nonprofit that is working on healthcare workforce. And one of these, the reasons that I'm here today is because there are so many people that are employed in healthcare in all sorts of occupations that are aging. And we have a serious issue where we have more people to care for and not enough people to provide the care. So as a social worker focused on gerontology, now working at this organization, I'm hoping to bring this to the conversation. So my specific question is, it seems to me that older adults have a choice earlier on in their lifespan to engage in a healthy aging. So working adults sometimes just retire and stop engaging. How do we build this productive aging into earlier lifespan? Because we're all aging and we're all going to face a time when we're not able to do the same things that we've always done. But I think that if we don't start early, we miss the boat. I just know from my own personal experience, I have family members that have retired and quickly aged, not engaged, not found it useful, not carved out the time and let health and other barriers get away from productivity in
Yeah.
older adulthood.
Yeah. I would zoom back and really kind of think about the social institutions that it's almost build it and they will come. We haven't built it, and so many people haven't come. And why is the fundamental reason for that? We, especially in the United States, are experts at segregating. We know how to slice and dice individuals into a million different identities and pit that against each other. And that has been true for institutions around aging. We have associated with older adults rather than life course. And so Age Discrimination and Employment Act, for example, 40 years and older, crazy. Younger folks experience that as well. So I would step back and really question the social institutions and the beliefs and the norms that are informing that. And it's how can we become experts at integration rather than segregation? And I think we could get some answers from that type of questioning. Regarding the workforce, though, there's some really fabulous research coming out of MIT Age Lab. And technology could be such a helpful friend here with lifting, lowering. The healthcare workforce does a lot of physically engaged work. Technology, lifting beds, seats, all that really important. So I would refer you to the MIT Age Lab on that. We do have another question here.
Well, first, I could listen to you all day, you know that, right? From a policy perspective.
Yeah.
In one statistic strikes me that I just saw that in 2025, I think that's this year, there will be more folks over 65 than under 17 in Michigan.
Yeah.
And what do you, and then you extrapolate that to other states of the country. How do we get the policy developed to address that and what that what entails?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at I think you had some of the pyramids up there, but there's a point where
Right.
it's no longer.
Right.
How, from a policy perspective, do you address that issue? Lots of folks, I tell the story and they wring their hands and sit down and we go on to something else. But I'm just curious.
Yeah,
what
so-
you have.
Great. Okay, so the question is, in the context of an aging society, we're becoming lopsided. We have a lot more older adults than younger folks. And how can we change that? Really vital, because so many of our social insurance programs are pay as you go. We adopted, just a quick history, we adopted Social Security almost wholesale from Otto von Bismarck in the 1880s. He didn't do it because he's a socialist. Germans were fleeing. They were coming to the United States for land. During the height of industrialization in Germany, they were losing limbs. They were losing lives. Job was a hazard. And if it was staying there in that context with the risk of crossing the ocean and having your own land, so Germany was experiencing a great migration at the time. In response, Otto von Bismarck essentially said, if you stay in Germany, there will be periods where amputation, losing limbs is a reality. We'll have disability insurance for you. There will be periods where you can't get a job. You pay into the system, we'll have unemployment insurance for you. And if you contribute to building Germany to what it could potentially be, you would get a retirement benefit from doing so. Slow down the migration, Germany became what we know of it today. But that was the pay-as-you-go system. And we adopted that wholesale, and practically every other country has done it. And we're now seeing the consequences of it. So how do we reverse the pyramid? A couple of European countries are incentivizing family. So flexible work arrangements, credits for having not just the second child, but the third child, you would get a check from the federal government. These types of policies, we could start to think of. The other thing that Europeans have done, which is incredibly controversial there, it's practically controversial worldwide, immigration. Immigrants are typically younger, healthier, motivated. They want to work. And in a couple of countries, that immigration policy has really helped turn around and slow down population aging. Very controversial in the United States at the moment. There is a graph that I didn't show, but because it felt like I was veering off a topic if I did. On the right, if you can see it, those are in the blue line, it's cognitive performance among individuals that were not born in the United States. And the red line is cognitive performance among US-born older adults in the HRS. When we're thinking about deportation, and especially deportation of older immigrants, you could also think brain drain is happening. So having older immigrants that have a desire to do caregiving and to be engaged in civic society and to possibly work, that's a resource for us. So I would really question immigration policy, especially with this administration, given that data. We don't need any more brain drain. We need as much of it as possible. Yes. Well, folks online won't be able to hear you.
Thanks. I'll introduce myself too, because I'm
Yes.
an occupational therapist. So I think about this in a
Got
little
it.
different way. So our profession started because social work, beginning of social work, and nurses and some psychiatrists and architects said, there's something else we need.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate when you were talking about those other factors that are affecting how people feel they're productive. Though I want to work off the word productive because a couple of things struck me.
Yeah.
The cognitive issue, since you brought it up again, that women didn't benefit as much from a highly complex job
Mhm.
as men, which feels
Mhm.
very cultural to me. Because of women that I know also juggling still today. And
Yeah.
I want to be careful how I say this because I have the co-parent in my life with me, but carrying that weight of all that other
Yeah.
things in their life. So the job draws away from that person's ability and they
Right.
can't benefit from that. But something is more deeply concerning to me. I volunteer.
Mhm.
I'm certainly an older adult. You can see that. And the place I volunteer is in the center of an area that had been redlined. So clearly, and many of the volunteers, I didn't grow up there, but many of them, I understand, moved out of the area, and except for those who were not allowed to do that. The volunteering is like a direct color issue.
Mhm.
And my getting to know people and going through the Flint water crisis and sitting through those talks and things, the older women carrying, for instance, a young woman telling me her mom, she can't work because she's taking care of school-age children every day after school and doesn't want them to be outside. It's too dangerous. So she has 8, all different age kids. So I guess what I'm getting at is that productivity that's not paid for.
Mhm.
And then those folks of different minority groups not volunteering at an older age, even feeling, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but there's a difference in the personal agency
Mhm.
of then feeling they're compared to somebody else. Do you
Mhm.
understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So at this place, they call me Dr. Eileen, not of my choice.
Mhm.
But they want that to be recognized, that those that coming for higher education, that here's somebody that can help you.
Yeah.
Well, then that to me leads those women that are my age that don't have that Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So I feel strongly, I'm glad that you're looking at those other factors, because I think those other factors are. But that means that has to be involved in how you then, and there needs to be a reason to come
yeah.
in that's rewarding. The other piece I'm trying to figure out from all your data is I didn't hear you talking about the types of work people did
Mhm,
to then want to retire early.
mhm.
Because what I hear people say, because I've done a lot of work on employment, is my feet are killing me so bad, I can't wait. I
Mhm.
can't wait to be done with this. Or, because by the way, I just talk to people who work, whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
So when I was out with the guys climbing the line to fix it on Christmas Eve, they were talking about how they protect the older worker. Unwritten law. They never let anybody over 60 climb the poles.
Hmm.
They just don't do it. And so like, it's too cold, it's too much. We don't want them to go through that after all these years. But the carpenters working outside on our house said, hey, I can't wait to be done.
Mhm.
And he was in his 50s.
Yeah.
So, and I know my own brother-in-law retiring early because of the heavy work he did. So you know where I'm getting at
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And direct care, as you know, is very high. If you looked at those, I don't know, have you looked at the cross section of, well, I don't know how easily you can access it now, but the frequency of injuries at work and those kind of things, did you use any of that?
Not
Like
yet.
stated occupations?
Yeah, not yet.
Because there's a lot of those, lower back issues and things like that.
Right. Well, I took notes. So there are three issues. So I could try to address them. Because these are all really important, on the hypothesis that women, for example, didn't benefit as much from complex jobs as men. But that was also true for Black men and women. So two competing hypotheses here, because I'm also hearing caregiving.
Well, the
As-
black men I'm meeting are the ones really trying. They're carrying, there's another weight they're carrying.
Yeah,
That's what I guess I'm saying.
right.
That cognitive load, that stress, the extra cognition at work
Yeah.
isn't a direct benefit to managing the complexities of where they live and keeping their kids safe or whatever.
And also the interpersonal dynamics at work. And so you could take two individuals that have high levels of education, different races, maybe different genders. Those that are minoritized are going to feel the brunt of having those leadership roles in that type of setting. So there's some racism that's happening, sexism that's happening in those types of roles. But the other thing that I hear you saying, and I was hoping to get to it at this graph, is, and oddly enough, role theory is applying here. There's only so much that we can do in juggling so many roles. There's a point where role enhancement becomes role strain. And I've experienced that. So many of us, I'm sure in the room, have been caregivers. When you are juggling a full-time job and helping family members and friends, and it varies. I mean, initially it could just be with banking. It could be just with shopping and groceries and such. That's not too bad. But when the caregiving demands come to toileting, dressing, bathing, in that state of caregiving, it's so critical to be there for your loved one. I've personally, my partner and I were the primary caregivers for my mother-in-law, helping my father-in-law as well. And it got to a point where it took a team for us to be there. And I could give very clear examples where my job suffered because of it. My opportunities for promotion suffered because I became that intense of a caregiver. And I work at such an incredible institution with some really great resources for caregivers. I think there's an opportunity for us not to put so much emphasis on work, paid work. We have to balance that out with being there for our family. When we value family and work, different policies start to emerge. And I would have benefited with my mental health and caregiving for my mother-in-law. So I think there's some role strain that's happening there. And for the interpersonal dynamics for individuals at work, racism and sexism is alive and well. And I think that's the reason as well that women, Black men and women, white women weren't benefiting as much from complex jobs. But these are just hypotheses. So we have to really test that. If we could get to your third issue very quickly, we haven't done a very good job to age-friendly workforces, age-friendly work. It's still the assumption that young people could do it. I come from a family of mechanics. They all retire as soon as they could from truck drivers. So I get that some jobs are really physically demanding. Other countries actually stratify the age at which you could retire based on your occupation. And I think that's a pretty great idea. We don't have that. It's one size fits all. And we could definitely learn from other countries that have taken that into consideration. Yeah. Okay. All right. And we also have folks online.
Okay, hi.
Okay. Thanks, Nola.
As an older adult who's interested in aging in place, I currently live in a neighborhood where I have families on both sides of me. I'm wondering if there's been any research that's been done to demonstrate whether living in a retirement community where everybody is 55 and older or beyond that accelerates the aging, slows it down, keeps it the same. What's happening? What I have read is that there's more and more interest in building these kind of communities, as what was mentioned, that there are more of us around.
Yeah, that's such a great question. You have Tam Perry, who's an expert in aging in communities. So I'm sure she could give you a far more eloquent answer. I am not familiar with research that would directly answer your question, other than, and this is an extreme case for which this is really not your question, but when individuals with mild cognitive impairment in a nursing home get placed in that floor with others that have significant cognitive impairment, there is a quick decline in their cognitive health. So your environment certainly could accelerate health disabilities. We've seen it in nursing homes, and that's part of the reason why they're so stratified by the cognitive health ward versus others. It's a great question because there are a couple of universities that are launching new programs where they're recruiting alumni to live on campus. The PACE program, Arizona State University, for example, and these should be continuum of care type of living arrangements. Folks that move there are alumni. They do it because they want to be with younger students. They still want to take classes. They want to engage in acting. They love the gym facilities. So if we could actually test that intergenerational model versus an age segregated model or an age integrated model in the community, we would be able to answer your question. But I don't have the research there to answer it at the moment. Yeah, thank you for that.
So everyone, please thank Dr. Gonzales for a really great lecture. And again, thank you. We hold this, the Winkelman Lecture every year, right around this time, right around the second or third week of February. And we look forward to have you here, God willing, next year in person. Again, thank you for both people online and both people here in person. Thank you for being here.